Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the docking bay of the Eternal Dominion and tried not to look nervous. The massive starship belonged to the Karvathi Empire, and everything about it was designed to intimidate. Dark metal walls stretched high above her head. Red lighting cast shadows everywhere. Even the air smelled different here, like hot stone and something wild she couldn't name. She was the first human to visit a Karvathi vessel. Most people thought she was crazy for volunteering. Dr. Chen. The voice rumbled like distant thunder. Sarah turned and immediately understood why everyone feared the Karvathi. War Matron Velrisa stood 8 feet tall. Her body resembled a massive feline, covered in dark scales that shimmered like oil. Crystalline fangs jutted from her jaw, catching the red light. Her eyes were golden with vertical pupils, and they watched Sarah with the intensity of a predator sizing up prey. Sarah had studied 17 alien species. She knew the protocol. Don't run. Don't show fear. Predator species respect confidence. War Matron Velrisa, Sarah said, keeping her voice steady. Thank you for allowing this cultural exchange. Velrisa's head tilted slightly. Your species is strange. The Galactic Coalition calls you prey class, soft, weak, no natural weapons. Yet you come here alone. She leaned closer and Sarah could feel the heat radiating from her scaled body. Why? Because understanding builds bridges, Sarah replied. And bridges bring peace. Something flickered in Velrisa's eyes. Amusement, maybe, or curiosity. Pretty words for someone who could be my meal? Could be, Sarah agreed. But you invited me to teach, not to eat. A sound erupted from Velrisa's chest. It took Sarah a moment to realize the War Matron was laughing. Several other Karvathi in the docking bay turned to stare. Apparently, this didn't happen often. Come, Velrisa said, turning away. I will show you our vessel, and you will meet the cubs. Sarah followed the War Matron through corridors that seemed designed for creatures twice her size. Other Karvathi passed them, each one stopping to stare at the small human walking beside their commander. Sarah heard whispers in their language, words she was still learning. Most seemed to be variations of prey and foolish. Your file says you study how species raise their young, Velrisa said as they walked. This interests us. Human young are weak, yes? They cannot walk for months, cannot feed themselves for years. How do they survive? We care for them, Sarah said simply. We protect them, teach them, help them grow. All species do this, yes, but humans do it as a community. Parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, neighbors, friends. We all help raise children together. Velrisa stopped walking. She turned to look down at Sarah with those unsettling golden eyes. All of you? The entire pack? We call it takes a village, Sarah explained. One person can't do it alone. Children need many sources of love and guidance. Love. Velrisa said the word like it was foreign. We teach strength, survival, combat. Those are important too, Sarah acknowledged. But children also need to feel safe, wanted, valued. The War Matron made a sound that might have been thoughtful or dismissive. Sarah couldn't tell yet. They continued walking until they reached a large chamber with reinforced walls. Through a transparent barrier, Sarah could see 3 small Karvathi cubs. They were beautiful. Each stood about 3 feet tall, covered in softer scales than the adults. Their crystalline fangs were still small like baby teeth. But even at this young age, Sarah could see the predator in them. They moved with coiled energy, all sharp movements and watchful eyes. Kira, Thrax, and Nessa, Velrisa said, and Sarah heard something different in her voice. Softer. Sadder. My children? Sarah looked at the War Matron with new understanding. You don't get to see them often, do you? Karvathi cubs train in the creche. They must learn to be strong without depending on parents. Weakness is death in our empire. Velrisa's claws scraped against the barrier. But Nessa, the smallest, she struggles. The trainers say she is too weak. They want to remove her from the warrior path. Inside the chamber, the 3 cubs were fighting over a piece of synthetic meat. The 2 larger cubs, Kira and Thrax, snarled and snapped. The smallest, Nessa, hung back, watching. She looked hungry, but she didn't fight. She's not weak, Sarah said quietly. She's scared. It is the same thing. No, Sarah said firmly. It's not. Fear is natural. It keeps us alive. But fear without support becomes trauma. Those cubs aren't learning strength. They're learning that the world is dangerous and no one will help them. Velrisa's entire body went rigid. You dare criticize Karvathi methods? Your species would be extinct if you faced what we face. Maybe, Sarah said, not backing down. But we survived by working together, not by making children face dangers alone. Let me try something different. If it doesn't work, you lose nothing. If it works, you might save Nessa. The war matron stared at the small human for a long moment. Sarah could see the conflict in those alien eyes. Pride warred with desperation. A mother's love fought against a warrior's training. Finally, Velrisa spoke to her wrist communicator in the Karvathi language. Moments later, 2 handlers entered the viewing area, looking confused by their orders. You have 3 days, Velrisa said to Sarah. Show me these human methods. But if you make them weaker, this ends. I won't fail, Sarah promised. She entered the chamber through an airlock. The 3 cubs immediately stopped what they were doing and turned to look at her. 6 golden eyes locked onto the human. New handler. Kira, the eldest, spoke in their clicking language. Sarah's translator implant converted it. This one is tiny, soft. Prey, Thrax agreed, moving closer. Why do they send us prey? Nessa said nothing, but she pressed herself against the far wall, watching. Sarah sat down on the floor, making herself smaller, less threatening. She pulled a bag from her shoulder and removed something the cubs had never seen before. A book, an actual paper book with a colorful cover showing strange creatures. I'm not a handler, Sarah said in their language, grateful for the months she'd spent learning it. I'm a storyteller, and I brought you something from my world. Would you like to hear a story? The cubs looked confused. Thrax sniffed the air, trying to understand what the book was. Kira circled Sarah slowly, looking for threats or tricks. What is story? Kira asked. Sarah smiled. Let me show you. She opened the book and began to read. Her voice was soft but clear in the chamber. She read about a small creature who went on an adventure, who met monsters and became king of wild things, who ultimately came home to where someone loved him best. The cubs didn't understand at first. They paced and hissed and tried to distract her. But Sarah kept reading, patient and calm. She showed them the pictures. She used different voices for different characters. She made it interesting, and slowly something changed. Thrax stopped pacing and sat down, his ears pricked forward. Kira stopped circling and moved closer, curious despite herself. And little Nessa, the scared one, took 3 careful steps away from the wall. By the time Sarah finished the story, all 3 cubs were sitting within 6 feet of her. Not touching, not trusting, but listening. Tomorrow, Sarah said, closing the book, I'll bring more stories, if you want to hear them. Yes, Nessa whispered. It was the first word Sarah had heard her speak. Through the observation window, War Matron Velrisa watched with her claws pressed against the glass and felt something she thought she'd forgotten how to feel. Hope. 3 days turned into 3 weeks, and the observation deck became Sarah's second home. The Karvathi had cleared out training equipment and brought in soft mats at her request. They thought she was insane. Warriors didn't need soft things. But Sarah insisted, and War Matron Velrisa had agreed to let her try the human way. Every evening Sarah arrived with her bag full of books. The cubs now waited by the door, their tails swishing with anticipation. It was a small thing, but important. They were learning to look forward to something other than combat training. Story time, Thrax announced when Sarah entered, using the human words he'd learned. His accent was thick, but Sarah's heart warmed every time he tried. Story time, Sarah agreed, settling onto the largest mat. She patted the spaces beside her. Come sit. This was the part that amazed the Karvathi observers most. The cubs, who snarled and bit their handlers during morning training, approached Sarah gently. Kira flopped down on Sarah's right side with a heavy thump. Thrax sprawled on her left, his tail curling around her leg. And Nessa, brave little Nessa, actually climbed into Sarah's lap. Through the observation window, a group of Karvathi elders watched with disapproval on their scaled faces. Commander, Thrax, Velrisa's mate and leader of the Crimson Guard, stood among them. This is wrong, one elder hissed. She makes them soft, dependent. Cubs must be hard. They are cubs, Elder Tusk, Velrisa replied, her voice tight. They need not be hard yet. You speak like prey now, Velrisa. The human poisons your mind. Velrisa's claws extended slightly, a warning. Watch your words. In the chamber below, Sarah had opened a new book. This one was called Where the Wild Things Are. She'd chosen it specifically because the creatures in it looked a bit like Karvathi, all fangs and claws and wild energy. "Let the wild rumpus start," Sarah read, making her voice loud and playful. The cubs loved this part. They jumped up and ran in circles, roaring and playing. It was play, not combat. They were allowed to be wild without being violent. It was a concept that confused every adult Karvathi who watched. After they tired themselves out, the cubs returned to Sarah's side, panting and happy. She continued the story, her voice dropping to a gentle rhythm as Max sailed home. "Why does Max go home?" Kira asked when Sarah finished. "He was king. He had power. Because someone loved him there," Sarah explained. "Someone who gave him hot food and cared about him. Power isn't the same as belonging." "I don't understand," Kira admitted. Sarah stroked the cub's head between her small horns. Kira leaned into the touch, purring. "You will. Let me tell you another story." She reached for a different book. This one was older, worn at the edges. "My mother read this to me when I was young. It's called The Velveteen Rabbit." The story was about a toy rabbit who wanted to be real. Sarah read about the old skin horse who explained that love makes you real. She read about how becoming real doesn't happen to toys who break easily, or who have sharp edges, or who must be carefully kept. It happens through love and time and worn edges. Nessa listened with her eyes fixed on Sarah's face. "The rabbit becomes real because someone loves it?" "Yes, sweetness. Real isn't about being perfect or being the strongest. Real is about being loved and loving back." "Am I real?" Nessa asked in a small voice. Sarah's heart broke a little. She pulled the smallest cub closer. "You are so real, so brave, so perfect just as you are." Thrax, who usually acted tough, pressed against Sarah's side. "Tell more." "Always," Sarah promised. She read them, the Gruffalo next, doing funny voices that made them laugh. Karvathi cubs didn't laugh often. The sound was rusty, unpracticed but genuine. The observers in the window shifted uncomfortably. Some looked disturbed, others looked thoughtful. "The mouse wins by being clever, not strong," Kira observed when the story ended. "This is not how Karvathi teach." "There are many kinds of strength," Sarah said. "Your people have taught you physical strength, that's important. But there's also emotional strength, intellectual strength. The strength to be kind when everyone else is cruel." "Is that human strength?" Thrax asked. "It's one of them. Humans aren't the biggest or fastest. We don't have claws or fangs. But we survived because we worked together. We cared for each other. We told stories that taught us how to be better." "What is better?" Nessa asked. Sarah thought about that. "Better is kinder than you were yesterday. Braver than you thought you could be. More yourself than anyone else expected." The cubs didn't fully understand, but they felt the warmth in Sarah's words. They pressed closer, seeking that warmth like plants seeking sun. By the time Sarah reached the end of her reading time, all three cubs were drowsy. Their eyes blinked slowly. Their purring filled the chamber with a rumbling sound like distant engines. "Sleep now," Sarah said softly. "I'll come back tomorrow." "Promise?" Nessa asked. "Promise." Sarah stood carefully, trying not to disturb them too much, but Kira grabbed her sleeve with one small paw. "Wait. What should we do if we feel scared? When you're gone?" Sarah knelt back down. "Remember the stories. Remember that being scared is okay. Remember that you're not alone. You have each other." "But you're not here," Thrax said. "I carry you in my heart," Sarah told them, pressing her hand to her chest. "And you can carry me in yours. That's how love works. It stays even when people leave." The cubs considered this. Then Kira placed her paw over her own chest. "In my heart. In my heart," Thrax echoed. "In my heart," Nessa whispered. Sarah left the chamber with tears in her eyes. She didn't see the elders in the observation room still watching. She didn't hear their heated argument about whether this was wisdom or weakness. She did see War Matron Velrisa waiting outside the door. They were never like this before, Velrisa said quietly, so calm, so happy. They were always like this, Sarah corrected gently. They just needed permission to show it. Children need structure and discipline, yes, but they also need comfort and love. Your cubs are strong, War Matron. Adding gentleness won't diminish that. It will enhance it. Velrisa looked at her children through the window. They had curled up together in a pile, the way cubs naturally want to sleep, the way they were never allowed to in the creche. Commander Thrakis says I am going soft, Velrisa admitted, that you have corrupted Karvathi ways. I've offered an alternative, Sarah said. You can take it or leave it, but ask yourself this. If your cubs grow up strong but empty, never knowing comfort or gentleness, what kind of warriors will they be? What kind of people? Velrisa's claws tapped against her thigh, a nervous gesture. The elders want me to end this, to return the cubs to standard training. Sarah's stomach sank, but she nodded. That's your choice. You're their mother. Yes, Velrisa said slowly. I am. And that is why I will give you 3 more weeks. I want to see where this leads. Relief flooded through Sarah. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, Dr. Chen. If the elders are right, if this makes my cubs weak, I will bear the consequences. And so will you. Sarah met the War Matron's golden eyes steadily. I'm not worried. Trust me. Trust them. Trust the process. Trust. Velrisa repeated. Another human concept. The most important one, Sarah agreed. She gathered her books and headed back to her quarters, exhausted but hopeful. She didn't know that in 3 more weeks, everything would change. She didn't know that one night of falling asleep would alter the course of 2 species' relationship forever. She only knew that 3 small cubs were learning to feel safe, and that was enough for now. 6 weeks had passed since Sarah first entered the cubs' chamber. The change in them was remarkable. They still trained hard in combat during the day, but they no longer bit their handlers. They listened to instructions. They even worked together instead of constantly competing. The elders remained divided. Some saw the improvement. Others saw only weakness in disguise. Sarah didn't care about politics. She cared about 3 small cubs who waited for her every evening, who had learned to trust, who were finally acting like the children they were supposed to be. Tonight, she was exhausted. She'd spent 14 hours in meetings with coalition representatives, discussing trade agreements and cultural protocols. Her head ached. Her eyes burned. But she had promised the cubs she would come, and Sarah Chen did not break promises. She entered the observation deck chamber carrying her bag of books. The cubs rushed to greet her, and Sarah smiled despite her fatigue. Story, story, Thrax chanted, bouncing on his paws. I brought a good one tonight, Sarah said, settling onto the mat. Her body felt heavy, like gravity had doubled. It's called The Velveteen Rabbit. I know I read it before, but Nessa asked if we could hear it again. It's my favorite, Nessa said shyly. The small cub had grown more confident over the weeks, but she was still gentle where her siblings were bold. Kira and Thrax groaned but settled down anyway. They'd learned that sometimes you read stories for others, not just yourself. That was another human lesson. Sarah opened the book and began to read. Her voice was softer than usual, worn thin by the long day. The cubs noticed but didn't comment. They pressed close, sharing their warmth with her the way she'd shared so much with them. Real isn't how you are made, said the skin horse. It's a thing that happens to you. Sarah's voice grew quieter with each page. The words started to blur together. She blinked hard, trying to focus. Does it hurt? I asked the rabbit. Sometimes, said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. Her eyes closed for just a moment. Just to rest them. Just for a second. When you are real, you don't mind being hurt, Sarah read, but her voice trailed off. The book slipped from her hands. Her head tilted forward, then back against the wall behind her. She was asleep. Kira lifted her head immediately. Sarah? No response. The human's breathing had changed, deep and slow. Thrax nudged Sarah's arm with his nose. Wake up, finish story. But Sarah didn't wake. She'd pushed herself too hard for too many days and her body had simply shut down. "Something's wrong," Nessa whispered, fear creeping into her voice. "No," Kira said, but she sounded uncertain. She'd never seen an adult sleep before. Karvathi adults meditated standing up, always alert. This looked different. Vulnerable. The cubs looked at each other, communicating in the way young ones do without words. Their human was helpless. The handlers would come eventually, but until then they were alone with her and she was defenseless. Thrax moved first. He pressed against Sarah's right side, careful not to jostle her. "She's warm." "Still alive?" "Of course she's alive," Kira snapped, but her relief was obvious. She took position on Sarah's left side, curling her body against the human's. Nessa remained where she was, staring at Sarah's peaceful face. "Should we call handlers?" "No," Kira said sharply. "Handlers might take her away. Might end story time. Might say she's weak. But she needs help," Nessa insisted. "We help," Thrax decided. "We protect. Like she protects us." It was a revolutionary thought for Karvathi cubs. Protection was something adults provided to young, not the other way around. But Sarah had taught them something different. She'd taught them that caring went both ways. The environmental system shifted as the ship entered its night cycle. The temperature in the chamber dropped several degrees. The cubs felt it immediately. Their scales regulated temperature well, but they noticed Sarah shiver in her sleep. Without discussion, all three cubs moved closer. They pressed their warm bodies against her, sharing their heat the way pack animals had done since the dawn of time. Nessa, the smallest, climbed carefully onto Sarah's lap and curled up on her chest. The warmth and weight seemed to comfort the sleeping human. Her shivering stopped. Time passed, 1 hour, then 2. The chamber doors suddenly slid open on their automatic cycle. It was a security feature, designed to prevent anyone from being trapped. The movement triggered lights in the corridor outside. Every protective instinct the cubs possessed roared to life. Kira's head snapped up. Her lips pulled back from her crystalline fangs. A low growl rumbled from her chest. Thrax moved to Sarah's front, crouching in a defensive position he'd learned in combat training. His claws extended. Even gentle Nessa raised her head from Sarah's chest and hissed at the open doorway. Her golden eyes fierce. They formed a protective triangle around the sleeping human, 3 small predators ready to fight anything that threatened their storyteller, their hackles raised, their tails lashed. They looked like miniature versions of adult Karvathi warriors, but fiercer somehow. More determined. Nothing came through the door. It was empty. But the cubs didn't relax. They maintained their guard, taking turns watching while the others rested. When one grew tired, another took over the watch. They moved carefully, always keeping Sarah protected in the center. In their own way, they were showing the most fundamental truth about Sarah's teachings. Love creates warriors stronger than training ever could. They weren't protecting her because someone ordered them to. They were protecting her because she mattered to them. And that made all the difference. Sarah slept on, unaware that she was being guarded by 3 small fierce hearts that had learned what it meant to care for someone else. The cubs had no concept of time passing. They only knew their duty. Their human needed them, and they would not fail her. When Kira's ears pricked forward suddenly, the other 2 cubs immediately went on alert. Footsteps in the corridor. Heavy ones. Multiple adults approaching. The cubs' growls intensified. Their bodies tensed. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. The door to the observation deck burst open. Commander Thrakus stood there leading a squad of Crimson Guard elite warriors. They were the finest fighters in the Karvathi military, trained to face any threat, but they froze when they saw what was inside the chamber. 3 cubs, barely past infancy, stood in combat formation around a sleeping human. Their fangs were bared, their eyes blazed with protective fury. They looked ready to fight warriors 10 times their size. Thrakus raised his weapon instinctively. It was trained reflex responding to a perceived threat. Kira's growl turned into a full roar. She crouched lower, muscles coiling to spring. She was telling the commander of the Crimson Guard, one of the most feared warriors in known space, that he would have to go through her to reach Sarah. "Stand down," Thrakus ordered using his command voice. Cubs always obeyed that voice. It was hardwired into them through generations of military training. The cubs didn't move, didn't even blink. War Matron Velrisa pushed through the guards, her eyes wide. Kira, Thrax, Nessa, what are you doing? Protecting, Kira said simply. Like Sarah protects us. More Carvathi crowded into the doorway now. Guards, officers, elders, all staring at the impossible scene before them. The movement and noise finally penetrated Sarah's exhausted sleep. Her eyes fluttered open. She saw scaled faces everywhere, saw weapons, saw the cubs in attack positions, and felt Nessa's trembling body on her chest. Wait, Sarah said, her voice rough with sleep. Wait, everyone stop. She moved slowly, carefully. Her hand stroked Nessa's head, gentle and reassuring. It's okay, sweetness. They're not going to hurt me. You're safe. I'm safe. Everyone's safe. But they have weapons, Thrax protested. They're guards. Weapons are their job, but see? They're lowering them now. Sarah looked at Thrakus meaningfully. The commander slowly lowered his weapon. His squad followed his lead, though they looked confused. Come here, Sarah said softly to each cub. You did so well. You protected me while I slept. You were so brave. I'm so proud of you. The cubs gradually relaxed, their aggressive postures melting away. But they didn't leave Sarah's side. They pressed close, still protective, still wary of all the adults crowding the doorway. Sarah looked up at the gathering of Carvathi leadership and saw shock on every face. What? She asked. Cubs don't protect, Thrakus said slowly. Cubs don't have guardian instincts. That doesn't develop until adolescence, until after combat training. Sarah looked down at the three small bodies pressed against her and smiled. Maybe they just needed a reason to protect. Maybe they needed someone worth protecting. The chamber fell silent. Every Carvathi present understood the implication. Their entire approach to raising cubs had been challenged by 3 children and 1 sleeping human. The emergency council meeting began 1 hour after the cubs were discovered protecting Sarah. The chamber was packed with Carvathi leadership. War Matron Velrisa stood at the center, flanked by Commander Thrakus. Sarah sat in a chair that was too large for her, feeling like a child called before stern teachers. The cubs were back in their quarters, probably confused and frightened. Sarah had promised she'd see them tomorrow. She hoped it was a promise she could keep. This is unprecedented, Elder Tusk declared, his voice sharp. Cubs do not have protective instincts. It is biologically impossible. The human must have used chemical manipulation. I used books, Sarah said calmly. Just stories and kindness? Kindness, another elder spat the word. A prey species concept. You have contaminated our cubs with weakness. They weren't weak when they faced down the Crimson Guard, Thrakus observed quietly. Every head turned to look at him. The commander rarely spoke in council. I have seen warriors break when I raise my weapon. These cubs held their ground, ready to die for something they valued. They are cubs, Elder Tusk insisted. They should value nothing but combat supremacy. Why? Sarah asked. The question hung in the air. Why should children value nothing but fighting? They're not weapons. They're people. They are Carvathi, the elder snarled. We are a warrior race. We survive because we are hard. Because we breed strength. Your human softness has no place here. Sarah stood up. Her body was small compared to every Carvathi in the room, but her voice carried weight. Let me tell you how humans survived. We were prey too, you know. Weaker than predators. Slower. No claws or fangs or armor. By your logic, we should have gone extinct millions of years ago. She had their attention now. Even the hostile elders were listening. We survived because we worked together. Because when one of us was weak, others carried them. When one was scared, others comforted them. When one fell, others protected them. We didn't survive despite our compassion. We survived because of it. Your species is soft, an elder muttered. My species conquered our planet, Sarah countered. We went from hiding in caves to building cities. We created art, music, literature, science. We reached the stars. And we did it all while caring for our young, our old, our weak. That's not softness. That's strength you don't recognize. Bold words, Velrisa said, and Sarah couldn't tell if it was approval or warning. But words do not change biology. You claim that kindness made my cubs develop protective instincts early. How? Sarah took a breath. This was the crucial moment. Because your cubs weren't broken. They were traumatized. There's a difference, angry growls erupted around the chamber. Sarah pressed on, knowing she might only get one chance to explain. Think about standard creche training. Cubs are taken from parents young. They're isolated from comfort. They're forced to compete for food, attention, approval. They're punished for showing affection or vulnerability. You call this strength training. I call it trauma. How dare you? Elder Tusk roared. Let her finish, Thrakus commanded. The chamber fell silent. Sarah nodded gratefully to him. Trauma doesn't make you stronger. It makes you reactive, defensive, unable to trust. Your cubs weren't weak, they were terrified. And terrified children don't learn. They just survive. She turned to address the whole council. When I started reading to them, I gave them something they'd never had. Safety without conditions. I didn't ask them to earn my attention by fighting. I didn't require them to be the strongest or the fastest. I just showed up every day and cared about them. That's all. And this created protective instincts? Belrisa asked. It created bonds, Sarah explained. Real ones. Cubs aren't robots. They're social creatures. When they feel safe and loved, they don't become weak. They become confident. And confident cubs want to protect what makes them feel safe. They developed guardian instincts early because they finally had something worth guarding. The chamber was quiet now. Sarah could see the Karvathi processing this information, challenging generations of assumed truth. You are saying, Thrakus said slowly, that we have been doing it wrong, all of it for generations. Not wrong, Sarah said carefully. Incomplete. You focused on one kind of strength and ignored others. Physical prowess is important. Combat skills are necessary. But emotional resilience, social bonds, psychological health, these matter too. Maybe even more. Ridiculous, an elder snapped. Emotions are weakness. Then why does your empire have loyalty ceremonies? Sarah challenged. Why do warriors fight harder for squad mates than for abstract concepts? Why do you have mate bonds and pack bonds? Those are all emotional connections. You already value them. You just don't extend that value to cubs. Velrisa's claws scraped against her seat. You are asking us to change everything. Our culture, our traditions. The foundation of Karvathi military supremacy. I'm asking you to add to it, Sarah corrected. Keep your combat training. Keep your strength conditioning. But add emotional support. Let cubs bond with parents. Let them feel safe sometimes. Let them be children before they become warriors. And you believe this will make them stronger? Thrakus asked. Sarah thought of Kira's fierce roar when defending her. Of Thrax's coiled readiness to spring at warriors 3 times his size. Of tiny Nessa, the runt, standing guard despite her fear. I know it will, she said. I saw it tonight. Your cubs were ready to fight the Crimson Guard. 3 babies against elite soldiers. That's not weakness. That's courage born from love. The council erupted into argument. Some elders shouted that this was heresy. Others demanded data, proof, studies. A few sat quietly, their expressions thoughtful. War Matron Velrisa raised her hand and silence fell. Dr. Chen, you care for my cubs. I have seen this. But do you understand what you are asking? If we change our methods, we risk producing weak generations. Weak generations mean conquest by enemies. It means the extinction of our species. Or, Sarah said softly, it means raising warriors who fight for something instead of just against things. Warriors who protect instead of just destroy. Warriors who know what they're defending when they go into battle. Isn't that stronger? Thrakus stood. The massive commander walked to where Sarah sat and looked down at her. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. The prey speaker has a point, he said. I have commanded warriors for 30 cycles. The best ones, the truly elite, they all have something beyond the battlefield. Mates, cubs, and squads they would die for. They fight not because they are hard, but because they love something. He turned to face the council. Perhaps we have been training our cubs to be hard but empty. And perhaps that is why so many break during their first real combat. They have nothing to anchor them. Nothing worth surviving for. Elder Tusk stood as well. This is sentiment clouding judgment. The human has infected you both. I call for a vote. End this experiment. Return the cubs to standard training. Remove the human from our ship. Seconded, another elder said. Velrisa looked at Sarah. The war matron's golden eyes were unreadable. Then she looked at Thrakus. Sarah saw something pass between the mated pair, some silent communication. I invoke parental right, Velrisa declared. These are my cubs, mine and Thrakus's. Under Karvathi law, we have final say in their training path until they reach adolescence. Elder Tusk hissed. You would defy the council? I would choose my children, Velrisa said simply. Dr. Chen's experiment continues. My cubs will split their time. Combat training in the morning. Human methods in the evening. We will measure the results over 3 cycles and present findings to the council. This is unprecedented, an elder protested. So are cubs protecting a sleeping adult, Thrakus countered. We live in unprecedented times. The vote was called anyway. It was close, very close, but enough council members were curious or convinced to allow the experiment to continue. As the meeting ended, Sarah felt exhaustion wash over her again. But also hope. She'd bought time. Time for 3 cubs to grow. Time to prove that strength and kindness weren't opposites. Velrisa approached her. Dr. Chen, thank you for fighting for them. They fought for me first, Sarah reminded her. Tonight when they stood guard, they were so brave. Yes, Velrisa said, and her voice carried wonder. They were. I have never been so proud and so ashamed at the same time. Proud of them. Ashamed it took a human to show me what they could become. It's not too late, Sarah assured her. It's never too late to change. To do better. Better, Velrisa repeated. That word again. Very well, Dr. Chen, show us better. Show us what Karvati cubs can be when they are both strong and loved. Sarah nodded. I will. Starting tomorrow when I read them the next story. What story? Velrisa asked, curious despite herself. Sarah smiled. The one about the little bear who was fierce and kind, brave and gentle. The one that proves you can be 2 things at once. As she walked back to her quarters, Sarah thought about 3 small cubs sleeping in their chamber, probably dreaming about stories and storytellers. She thought about what they'd done tonight, standing guard like miniature warriors. The galaxy was about to learn something important about humans. They didn't just pack bond with their own species. They pack bonded with anyone who needed them, and that made them more dangerous and more valuable than any weapon, because a human who loves you will teach you to be better, and better is the most revolutionary concept of all. 3 months passed on the Eternal Dominion and everything had changed. The video had done it. Security footage of 3 cubs standing guard around a sleeping human had been leaked, probably by a sympathetic officer. Within days, it spread across every coalition channel. Every species watched the tiny predators protecting their storyteller. Some found it amusing. Others found it touching. But everyone found it remarkable. Humans, the species most others had dismissed as soft prey, had done something no one else had managed. They'd made Karvathi cubs display protective behavior years before it should have been biologically possible. The communications flooded in. Other warrior species wanted to understand. Science teams requested to study the phenomenon, and most surprisingly, other Karvathi war matrons began asking questions about human child-rearing methods. Sarah became famous overnight. The coalition media called her the Pack Bonder. The humans called her the Cub Whisperer. She didn't care about the titles. She cared about 3 cubs who were thriving. Kira had become a leader among the Kresh cubs. She taught the others that cooperation wasn't weakness. She organized them into actual teams instead of just competing individuals. The trainers were amazed at how much faster the cubs learned when they helped each other. Thrax had found confidence. He no longer fought just to prove he was strong. He fought with purpose, with control. His instructors said he showed the discipline of cubs twice his age. And Nessa, little Nessa, who had been labeled too weak, too soft, too broken for the warrior path. She had become the star of her training cohort. Because while she was small, she was clever. She used strategy where others used brute force. She found weaknesses others missed. And she never ever gave up on her siblings. The cubs still spent every evening with Sarah. That hadn't changed. But now other cubs joined them sometimes. The observation deck had become a library. Sarah read to groups of 10 or 15 cubs at a time, all curled together, all listening to stories about friendship and bravery and kindness. The elders still grumbled, but they couldn't argue with results. The cubs in Sarah's program performed better in combat training. They had fewer injuries because they protected each other. They learned faster because they taught each other, and they showed none of the psychological breaks that sometimes happen to cubs under standard conditioning. War Matron Velrisa had become Sarah's strongest advocate. She spoke at council meetings about the changes in her cubs. She shared data showing improved performance metrics, and she did something revolutionary. She apologized. I failed my children, she told the council. I thought removing them from my presence made them strong. It only made them afraid. Dr. Chen gave them what I should have given them from the beginning: love without conditions. The word love in a Karvathi military council was shocking. But Velrisa didn't back down. Neither did Thrakus, who had become equally convinced. The strongest warriors I know, Thrakus told his Crimson Guard, all fight for something beyond themselves. They fight for pack, for cubs, for mates. That is not weakness. That is purpose. The cultural shift was slow but undeniable. Some Karvathi clung to old ways, but others began bringing their cubs to family quarters instead of leaving them in creches. They began reading to them, playing with them, showing them affection openly. The humans were officially granted a seat on the Coalition Council, not because of military might or economic power, because they had demonstrated something more valuable: the ability to bridge cultural divides through empathy. Sarah received ambassadorial status. She was called to other ships, other planets, other species. Everyone wanted to understand human bonding capabilities, but she always returned to the Eternal Dominion. To 3 cubs who were growing fast but who still needed their stories. 1 year after that night when the cubs stood guard, Sarah received an invitation. It came from Velrisa, written in formal Karvathi script. You are invited to witness the ascension ceremony of Kira, Thrax, and Nessa. As cubs become warriors, they honor those who shaped them. Our children wish to honor you, Sarah cried when she read it. Happy tears, proud tears. The ceremony was held in the main hall of the Eternal Dominion. Hundreds of Karvathi filled the space. The cubs, no longer quite so small, stood at the center in ceremonial armor. They were beautiful. Kira stood tall and confident. Thrax's muscles had filled out, his stance balanced and ready. And Nessa, still smaller than her siblings, carried herself with a quiet dignity that commanded respect. The ceremony followed ancient tradition. Each cub demonstrated their skills in combat. They moved through forms that showed their training, their discipline, their prowess. The watching Karvathi roared approval. Then came the honors section. Each cub could present a token of their first battle honor to someone who had shaped them. Kira stepped forward first. She approached Commander Thrakus and placed a crystalline fang token in his massive hand. For teaching me, strength has many forms, she said formally. Thrakus accepted with pride. You honor me, cub who leads. Thrax approached War Matron Velrisa. He placed his token in her hands. For choosing a better path even when it was hard. Velrisa's eyes gleamed with emotion. You honor me, cub who stands. Then Nessa stepped forward. But she didn't approach the Karvathi leadership. She walked to where Sarah sat among the honored guests. The small warrior knelt before the human and offered her token. For showing me that being different is not the same as being weak, Nessa said clearly. For teaching me I was real. For being my first guardian. Sarah took the token with trembling hands. It was engraved with words in both Karvathi and English. Our first guardian. You honor me beyond measure, Sarah whispered, pulling Nessa into an embrace that would have been scandalous a year ago. Now several adult Karvathi dabbed at their eyes, but the 3 cubs weren't finished. Together they turned to face the assembled crowd. We have one more presentation, Kira announced. Our creche mates wish to honor the one who changed everything. 20 more young Karvathi warriors stepped forward, all holding identical tokens. One by one they approached Sarah and placed their tokens at her feet. For teaching us that warriors can be gentle. For showing us that strength includes compassion. For proving that love makes us braver, not weaker. For reading us stories when no one else would. For making us believe in better. By the time they finished, Sarah was surrounded by tokens and tears ran freely down her face. The assembled Karvathi, even the elders, even Elder Tusk himself stood and roared approval. It shook the walls of the ship. After the ceremony, there was a feast. Sarah sat with Velrisa, Thrakus, and their now adolescent cubs. Around them, Karvathi families gathered, parents with their cubs all talking and laughing and telling stories. You've changed us, Velrisa said quietly. In 1 year, you've changed centuries of tradition. I just offered an alternative, Sarah said. You all chose to take it. That took real courage. The Coalition Council has made a request, Thrakus said. Other warrior species want human cultural consultants. The Draknor, the Volkesh, even the Eternal Hunters. They're calling it the Compassion Offensive, Kira added with amusement. Humans are terrifying because they make everyone want to be better. Will you go? Nessa asked Sarah. Will you teach others what you taught us? Sarah looked at the 3 young warriors who had been scared cubs a year ago. She thought about how they'd stood guard over her that night, how they'd been brave when they had every reason to be afraid. Yes, she said, if you'll come visit me sometimes. I'll miss you. We will always visit, Thrax promised. You carry us in your heart. We carry you in ours. 5 years later, Sarah stood in a new observation deck on a coalition diplomatic station. This room was much larger than the one on the Eternal Dominion. It needed to be, because it was filled with cubs from 6 different species. Karvathi cubs curled next to Draknor hatchlings. Volkesh pups dozed beside Eternal Hunter kits. And in the middle of them all, human children sat cross-legged helping Sarah tell the story. Because that was the thing about humans and pack bonding. It spread. Human families had started volunteering as cultural ambassadors. Human children were growing up with alien friends. And everywhere humans went, they left behind the simple radical notion that caring for each other made everyone stronger. The door slid open. Sarah looked up and smiled. Kira stood in the doorway, now a full Crimson Guard warrior. Behind her, Thrax commanded his own unit, and Nessa was liaison officer for the new cultural integration program, but right now they were just Sarah's cubs grown tall and strong. Room for 3 more? Kira asked. Always, Sarah said. The 3 warriors, fully armored and decorated with honors, settled onto the floor like they were cubs again. The younger children stared in awe at these powerful soldiers who sat peacefully for story time. Tell the one about the wild things, Nessa requested, or the Velveteen Rabbit. Thrax suggested. Both, Kira decided. We have time. Sarah opened her books and her voice filled the room. Around her, cubs and children from across the galaxy listened with rapt attention. Behind them, 3 Karvathi warriors stood guard, protecting the circle of storyteller and listeners. Protecting what mattered.